You're listening to the ATS Breathe Easy podcast, brought to you by the American Thoracic Society.
Welcome to the ATS Breathe Easy podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Erika Moseson, a pulmonary critical care medicine physician in Oregon and host of the Air Health, Our Health podcast. I'm honored today to be joined by Dr. Neeta Thakur. Dr. Thakur, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you for having me here today. So I'm a pulmonologist at University of California, San Francisco. I practice at our county hospital, San Francisco General, and my research is focused on place-based stressors and how it impacts respiratory health.
And we're here today to talk about the roller coaster you've been on in terms of your grants and them being both requested by the EPA and then canceled by the EPA. And you do research on wildfires and air quality, which of course is very important for all of us on the West Coast. Why don't you tell us how you came to do that research?
Yeah, the research idea came to us back in 2019 after having a few fires up in Northern California actually interrupt the research that we were doing. We work a lot in the community, specifically a community called Richmond, California, that has a high asthma prevalence. And a lot of our participants were asking us questions about, well, what do I do with these wildfire events? How do I protect my health from the smoke? We don't have a lot of resources. Like, what advice do you have? And that got us thinking about our communities that we're working with that often live in lower quality housing, and the wildfire smoke goes from outside to inside, and thinking about the recommendations where it's like, stay inside and close your windows. But we're having wildfire smoke events that are happening in the summertime and it's really hot, and that advice doesn't always work. And so we started thinking about, well, what kind of project could we do to better understand how these wildfire events are impacting health across California, and really thinking about the communities that don't have as much resources to protect and be resilient during these events. And so that was when we first came up with this idea.
And can you tell us what is known currently about how wildfires affect the health of your patients?
Yeah, so most of the research to date has really focused on single day events. So how is the smoke today impacting someone's health that same day? We know that it's associated with hospitalizations and emergency room visits for both COPD and asthma. It also increases your risk of heart attacks, of strokes. And we also know that the wildfire events are also associated with death. What we don't really know is, well, how long do those events happen after a wildfire smoke event? I can say in my own practice, like at the county hospital, I was having patients with COPD coming in like 4 to 5 to 6 weeks after a wildfire event with all of these symptoms consistent with an exacerbation. And they're like, it really started after the event, the wildfire day, like 4 weeks ago. And then I'm giving them steroids and treating them for exacerbation. I'm like, this is like a complete unknown. And so we, in addition to understanding like resources to help people protect their health, so then we added on this idea of like, well, how long do these health effects last? And we felt that was important from thinking about resource allocation and how to respond as a community, and how long after an event are we expecting to see these attacks happening.
And your research has previously explored in general how air pollution or things like pollution from wildfire affect some people more than others. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so we look at lots of different exposure. So we kind of think of ourselves as like thinking about place-based exposure. So that includes air pollution, includes concentrated poverty, includes things like housing quality. And what we found is that in communities that have higher air pollution and worse housing quality and less accesses of resources, are also the same communities that have high percentages of asthma, of COPD, of heart disease, of preterm birth. You can go on and on and on. And so we see these diseases happening in higher prevalence in these overburdened and overexposed communities. So our group has done a concerted effort to go into those communities and really learn from our community members on things that they're worried about. And then we incorporate those perspectives in our research to try to understand how we could change things to make communities more resilient, both chronically from these exposures, but also during these abrupt high exposures such as extreme heat and wildfire smoke.
Yeah, and the EPA had actually asked you and your team, because you had this expertise, to do the research in 2021 about the impact of climate change in underserved communities, wildfires, and more. And then the current administrator abruptly attempted to cancel those grants. So can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, so we responded to a request for proposals from the EPA. I think the actual title was Cumulative Impacts in Vulnerable Communities, to examine the impacts of climate change. And so we were really excited because we had already been doing this work, and put in a really exciting grant to look at hourly wildfire smoke exposures, and the impact of that on health across the state of California, with this focus on looking at overburdened communities. We also built in a really nice partnerships with our different communities that we were in, to survey and try to understand the health concerns of community members, the resources they access during the events, and like what are those barriers to those resources. So really informative work to both trying to better understand wildfire health impacts, but then also understand the implementation challenges in protecting community. And we were underway, just started year 3. We just finished our wildfire smoke model, which was really, really exciting. We had health data to work with. We were about to start a survey in 2 communities, working with 8 community-based organizations. And then April 30th, we get this email that says your grant has been terminated. We received an attached form letter, describing the reasons for it. And it really boiled down that your research no longer aligns with the priorities of the federal government, and no other explanation. It was pretty devastating, to get the email, particularly since we were making so much progress, and usually it takes time for research to get to that point, and we were at that point where we were really excited to dive into doing the analysis and getting results that would be meaningful, and to have it really just stop at that point was really, really hard.
Yeah, I can't imagine. You think about all the money that's already been spent, and then, you're just at the point where you're supposed to get the results to make all that spent money worth it, and then the rug just being yanked out from under you. When you dug deeper, were you able to find anything on reasons that your grant was targeted for cancellation?
Not directly from the federal government. What we do know from what was released from our current administration is that they were planning to reduce support for activities that supported diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion. When that executive order came out in January of 2025, it explicitly named any research that was supporting environmental justice work would be not aligned with the current administration policies. And when you think about the project that I just described, we were directly focused on supporting work in environmental justice communities, which are communities that are historically both overburdened by environmental exposures and structural inequities, and also have a high prevalence of disease such as asthma and COPD. And we were also focused on the impacts of climate change. And we know that the current administration is not interested in funding work as it relates to climate change, even though we were really focused on studying the health impacts of wildfires, which is a climate sensitive event, and really trying to understand the impact across all communities in California. We suspect that's the reason why it was canceled, and suspect why all of the grants under that announcement for funding were canceled, but we don't have any direct reasons or rationales from the federal government.
Early bird registration for ATS 2026 in Orlando is now open. Register now and save. Members get a discount, so become an ATS member or renew your membership to take advantage of the savings. Visit conference.thoracic.org today.
From a day-to-day operation standpoint, what is that like in terms of the logistics for staffing, for hiring, for trying to complete research? What was the impact that had?
It brings in a lot of uncertainty. As you can imagine, that while this grant was terminated, I had other grants that were in similar areas of inquiry. So looking at uh, social factors and structural factors and environmental hazards, and often working with environmental justice communities that were also federally funded. And I had no idea what was going to happen to those grants if I already had one that had been terminated. And so for me, it resulted in a lot of uncertainty about what I could do for funding my staff and for funding myself. Pretty soon after, I did have to let go of a student intern working with our group. I had to also let many staff members know that I was unsure of their future funding, and if they found other positions, it would be in their best interest to go with those other positions. And we did lose some staff members as a result of that. We also had to stop our relationships with several of our community partners because we had no way of funding those relationships. And that was a really, really hard decision because anyone that does community-based research knows that the amount of time that it takes to build up that trust and really build out those relationships is really, really long and really precious. And we had to stop that because we knew that we couldn't appropriately compensate the partners, and it didn't feel appropriate to ask them to do work when we couldn't help support that work. All of our partners were really understanding, but it was just one of those things where you're like, I just got so far to build your trust, and then now this happened, and I'm not sure what this means for the future of this relationship. It also meant that we weren't able to gather information about how people were accessing resources during these events. And if you reflect on right around that time, we're seeing recovery from the Altadena and the LA fires. And this information was really, really relevant. And so it was just really hard, both from a personnel standpoint, but then also from like a research loss perspective, and then also from a partnership perspective to have everything stop so suddenly.
Yeah, and with all that devastation, it led you and some other University of California researchers to actually file a lawsuit. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'd be remiss if I don't shout out Claudia Polsky, who's a professor of law at UC Berkeley. Um, she calls herself the spark that led to the spark of an idea for the lawsuit. And it's really sort of brought itself forward with all of the support from the investigator signing on, but then also our legal representation. Um, our contract was we had a subcontract with UC Berkeley. And my colleague reached out to me, who was part of our subcontract there, and was like, hey, would you be open to talking with Claudia about the potential for a class action lawsuit? And so, in discussing the potential with Claudia, um, it gave me a sense of hope that there is a potential pathway forward to really fight against something that felt really illegal. Right? We had this confirmation, a contract with our federal government, giving us funds to do this research, and based on that contract, we had been doing the work. We had been meeting our milestones. We've been, fulfilling our side, and so it felt really wrong that you could just have that pulled from underneath you, and that gave me hope that okay, I don't think the appeal process is going to get me very far as an individual investigator, but perhaps signing up and being part of this class action lawsuit with a group of similarly impacted investigators doing all sorts of amazing science and research and amazing things, that maybe together collectively we could not just fight what happened to us, we could also stand up and fight and potentially protect other investigators that were similarly impacted in the UC system.
Yeah, I can't imagine being a physician and a scientist trying to just get through all the normal hoops and hurdles of grants and everything, and now finding yourself engaged in litigation with the government. I mean, what was that like?
It was a bit surreal, but as mentioned before, I felt like it was the first time that I felt empowered and hopeful from the time point that I first received the termination notice that, oh, I can maybe do something about this or be part of something that could do something. And so I actually personally found it really empowering to be able to take part in the lawsuit. And honestly, the amount of work involved compared to like having to put together a full grant application, which I didn't know what will go anywhere, or to complete the appeal process where I had no idea if it was going to be successful, was probably the most worthwhile thing that I've done in many, many years, if not for my entire career. The amount of time involved was meaningful. I got to learn a lot more about our legal process and really respect the judicial system and them having this avenue available for people in the country. And again, it just felt really empowering to be part of something bigger and potentially being able to reverse what was happening to many scientists and researchers similar to myself.
Well, as a clinician who relies on science that you and other members of ATS and more do, I really appreciate you standing up. What concerns do you have about how this might impact science and health going forward? The fact that we have scientists having to sue to get the funding that's already been allocated to them.
Yeah, I think the couple of concerns that I have is one is that there's going to be a lot of research that just doesn't get done, right? We've invested millions, if not billions of dollars into science, and we've had many grants canceled. And so while my grant was reinstated as a result of the lawsuit, which is still ongoing, many of my colleagues that were funded under the same request for applications, because they're in a different institution and not part of the UC system, their work was never refunded. So their work won't ever be fully realized in its initial intention. And that's true for hundreds, if not thousands, of other scientists. And my worry there is that we won't have those discovery. We also have invested so much of taxpayers' money, and we're never going to have that investment fully realized. And that makes me worry about the public trust in science and that eroding further. Um, the other thing I'm concerned about is like, what impact does this have on academia in general, and specifically on the next generation of scientists? We depend on research funds to really support our trainees' education, their postdoctoral experiences. And if there's no resources to, or groups or labs to join to train those individuals, those spots disappear. And people are not going to want to stay in research if there's no viable pathway to continue onwards without the bedrock of federal funding that we've had for over 50 years. And so that's really worrisome because that's going to impact our ability to make discovery to further improve human health. And that's really worrisome.
Absolutely. Where do you see hope for science and health?
I see hope in lawsuits such as these. We have seen our judicial system stand and see in favor of science and also the persistence of funding these grants. And I should make mention that not all the research grants are purely for traditional science as we think about it. Many of them are also to support our humanities and to support our arts. Um, and so by reinstating this, it shows value for the contracts that were set up initially, and then also for showing value in science and the arts and the humanities. So I see hope there. I see hope in my colleagues. I will be remiss if I didn't comment that, like, when all of this was going on, many of us as faculty and then also with our trainees would come together and figure out, like, how do we work together to write grants together so that we can support more people off of one endeavor as opposed to each just going after our own thing. How can we use this as an opportunity to think about new ideas and new areas of inquiry without having to sort of throw away work that may not appeal to the current administration? So how do we stay true to our research missions and our mission to our communities and to inquiry? And so that has given me a lot of hope. I'm also seeing efforts to build up more local infrastructure to support science as well. And so that also has provided me with a lot of hope.
So, what can physicians, healthcare workers, other scientists, the broader ATS community do to ensure an ongoing healthy environment for science, healthcare, and environmental policy?
Yeah, so I think one thing locally that people can do is call their representatives, write to their representatives. We did see Congress recently pass support for persistence of the funding for the NIH and CDC. So our efforts are working. It's really important to be part of the discussion and take part of the processes to do that. I think we can also try to support any efforts that might be going on at your local university to stand up. We are trying to highlight impacted investigators and try to find ways that people can stand up and also take part of the process. So I think ways that individuals can help preserve science is to, one, contact their local representative, reach out, call them, email them, write to them, show up when they're speaking, go to their town halls, and tell them why you're interested in seeing science remain funded. Our voices collectively really have influence. We see that. We see Congress now trying to pass bills that are earmarking a large amount of funding for NIH. We saw last week that the grants for addiction and mental health were canceled from SAMHSA. In less than 24 hours, Congress stood up and helped reverse that. So our voices on the ground are influencing our representatives. So continue to do that. I think locally, if you're able and you're a scientist and have the means, supporting our postdocs, our trainees, and bringing them into our lab to create experiences for them so that they get motivated and that they want to continue in science is really, really important. And then I think encouraging folks to think about alternative modes of funding. We really need the federal funding to be invested. It's been the bedrock for so long. It provides so much funding for science, arts, and humanities. But as investigators, we need to be sure that we're also looking for other sources and finding those sources and going into it with team science approaches so that we can bring more creativity to the process, but also being able to stay long-term in academia. And then lastly, I would say is to be there for each other. There is something powerful about standing with your colleagues and being able to think through solutions together. We don't need to face this alone. We are a collective power as faculty members at these different institutions, as practicing providers, really standing for science to ensure the betterment of our patients' health. So as a community, we have a large voice and we also have a way to support each other through that same community.
Amen. Well, thank you for your time and all the science you do. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think that was a great conversation, Erika. I really appreciate you having me on today to share this experience.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more, visit our website at thoracic.org. Find more ATS Breathe Easy podcasts on Transistor, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a show.